It didn't quite hurt as much as he expected. Yes, it hurt a lot. And yes, a human being would never have survived. A transmit machine takes you apart and puts you back together again. But the whole thing is over so quickly you shouldn't even notice. This one had taken its time. The doctor had felt himself being slowly reassembled in agonizing torture when there was not enough of him to scream. But as he emerged from the transmit booth into the dark, noisy engine room, he felt pretty much okay. His legs buckled underneath him, and he fell face first onto the floor. He struggled to get up again and found his limbs weren't quite responding. His arms and legs tangled with pins and needles, like they did when he regenerated. Perhaps that's what he's done. His body's responding automatically to being pulled apart. He struggled to reach a hand up to his face. His fingers prodded familiar skin, tingled over prominent bones, and had the same thick hair and long, full, furry sideburns, and though his mouth tasted particular, his teeth seemed to be the same shape. They'd never been before. So he was still the same man from the moment. But it said a lot about what he'd just been through that he'd not been sure. As feeling came back to him, he heard hesitant shuffling footsteps. It took effort to sit up, but going slowly he managed it. A group of mouthless men in leather aprons and Burma shorts huddled in short distance from him, in a narrow alleyway between the huge dark machines. One mouthless man gestured and pointed to the far end of the engine rooms. The doctor squinted to make sense of what he saw. A tall, shiny, skinny man in a fetching pinstripe suit was stepping into the wall of scrambled eggs. Huh, thought the doctor, watching him vanish. He had meant to say, Is that really what my hair looks like from the back? He sat there, recovering, and after a while, the mouthless man brought him a mug of tea with a picture of a sheep on it. His hand shook as he held the mug, but with each sip he felt better and better. The engines around him filled his head with noise, and his skin felt itchy with grime. Yet the dark and solid machinery seemed immaculate. The air rich with the stink of detergent as he imagined the dirt. Thank you, he said as the mouthless men helped him up on his feet. They let him walk unaided, but kept close in case he fell. The doctor made his way to the wall-mounted controls of the experimental drive. A small porthole let him look into the machine itself as he gazed in on the eerie light. The light was just the same as that inside the TARDIS central column. It swirled and murmured, restless and alive. Okay, said the doctor, checking over the engine controls. He made a mental note of the readings and how they differed from the upstairs on the bridge. The trick was, then, to get the TARDIS to make up for the difference. That would, he hoped, break them from the loop. Adjusting dials and switching levers, he felt an old speed and dexterity returning to his fingers. His thoughts were starting to speed up too. He spun on his heels, surprising the mouthless men, and hurled down the alleyway between the large machines to where the TARDIS waited. It took a moment to find the key, and then he was inside. As always, stepping over the threshold filled him with a sense of ease. His head felt cleared and his body less sore. The console still sparkled and smoked from when the ship had crashed into the Brilliant. The doctor hurried over, swatting away the smoke and working on various controls. Yes, he could see it clearly now. They'd crashed because the Brilliant sat just outside space and time, like jumping onto a moving bus, only it turned out to be rushing towards you. Gravitating anomalies protested as he wound its round to 8. He keyed in on the values of the Brilliant's two different Kodiak readings and fired up the TARDIS's temporal shield. The idea was that he could give the Brilliant a nudge in the right angle and the starship's own system would do the rest. He wouldn't even need to use the TARDIS' own reality warping talents. And then the thought struck him, a brilliant one. He hurried around the console, pulling up the floor grating to expose the thick black cables colliding underneath. A bit of sonic screwdriver action and he'd separated one of the connections. Bit of what might have been scrambled eggs dripped from the open end of the cable. He hurried back through the TARDIS, bringing the cable so that it split out behind him, still connected to one end of the machinery of the TARDIS. It took a bit of negotiating the cable through the alleyway between the Brilliant's huge and noisy engines, but like getting the flex from the vacuum cleaner to fit around the chair and tables. But he reached the controls of the experimental drive and then just had to find something that he might connect the cable to. The control deck of the experimental drive had input ports, but not quite fitted. Ah, said the doctor. Should have thought of that. He looked quickly all around for something that might help, but he knew there was little he could do. And then one of the mouthless men came forward with what looked like a squeezy bottle of ketchup, and the doctor tried plugging the TARDIS cable into each of the different ports, and one he'd identified the best fit. The mouthless man sealed it with jelly-like sealant, and oozed from the squeezy bottle, and it was the same fast-acting implement strung in stuff that sealed the holes in the side of the ship when Archibald's capsule had torn through it. Well done, you, said the doctor to the mouthless man, as he tested the joint was secure. In fact, the joint was stronger than the cable was itself. The doctor hurried back to the TARDIS. A group of mouthless men huddled at the doorway, peering into the huge interior, but not daring to venture any further. Well, said the doctor, are you going to say how it's bigger on the inside? The mouthless men turned to look at him. No, I guess not, he said. Look, you can ride with me, but it's going to be bumpy, or you can stay here, which will probably be the same. Your choice. It was a little disappointing, but none of the mouse men would come with him. He shrugged, ducked between the two into the TARDIS, and dashed over to the controls. The mouthless men watched him from the open doorway, a thick black cable snaking between their legs, back to the controls of the experimental drive. He could see them wanting to ask him what he had just done. I have bolted your ships to mine, he said, and now I can run your system from here. But my ship can also compensate for some of the loopy stuff happening. So I might be able to control the aspects of the loop itself. And then we're laughing. The mouthless man nodded, though not keenly as he would have liked. Still, there was little that he could do about it now. You probably want to stand back a bit, he told them. They retreated in fear as he worked the controls in front of him. It had been a while since he last tried to take off with the door still open. He thought, probably because it was such a dangerous thing to do. Dangerous and reckless and irresponsible. Just his thing, really. He released the TARDIS handbrake. With a familiar low rasping grating from the deep within the strange engines of the TARDIS began to warp the material of space and time around it. The doctor stood resolute at the controls as what might have been a tornado tear through the open doors that sent paper sweets and his 1966 Martin Rowland's triphone whirling all around him. Where before the open TARDIS doors had looked into the engine rooms, the way was now blocked by a wall of pulsating, stringing scrambled eggs. Tornado whirled even faster around him, howling and shrieking in time to the noise of the TARDIS engine. And then it was suddenly over, and the sweets and papers and designer telephone crashed to the floor. Said it was easy, said the doctor, though only to himself. He bounded through the open, eggless TARDIS door and back into the Brilliant's engine room. Oh, he said, stopping suddenly. I don't think that's quite right. Outside the engine room lay silent. A huge machinery stood perfectly still. There was no one about. "Hello," called the doctor. No one responded. "I know you can't speak," he called out, "but maybe you could hit something to make some kind of noise." Again there was nothing but silence. Moving slowly, wearily, the doctor followed the thick black cable from the TARDIS as it wended along an alleyway between the still machines. The cut-off end of the cable laid on the floor in front of where the controls for the experimental drive had been. It had been cut off with a knife. "Ah," said the doctor. That shouldn't have happened." He examined the empty space. It was clear the experimental drive had been torn from the housing in which it had been secured. For a moment he wondered if perhaps relaying the brilliant had made the drive implode, which would have quite a neat solution to everything. But his heart he knew that couldn't have been what happened. The walls of the engine room were mismatched with car-sized patches of red jelly sealant. The doctor could see that at least 6 or 7 pirate capsules had torn their way around the ship, and then torn their way off again. Any of the mouthless men who had been in the engine room when the pirate ships tore through the hull would have been quickly sucked out into space. "Ah," said the doctor. "Must be running late again." Desperate to find out what happened to Martha, he grabbed the cut-off end of the cable and quickly gathered back up into the TARDIS. He repaired the link later when he knew Martha was okay. Locking the door of the TARDIS, he made for the transmit booth. With the ship realigned, it should be working properly once again. He hit the controls and nothing happened. Annoyed, he checked over the transmit system, and the booth he was in and seemed to be in good working order, but it couldn't reach the booth upstairs. And a chill ran through the doctor. He dashed down the alleyway between the huge machines to the door he'd only seen before, blocked by scrambled eggs. There were no eggs now, and he ran out into the push-carpet passageway, the wood-paneled walls, and patched the car-sized holes where the pirate capsules had pushed through. He ran left again, and then right, and took the stairs 3 at a time, halfway up the staircase to the ballroom, where he first saw the first dead body. One blue blurman man lay sprawled out on top of the stairs, a terrible blank expression on his face. Further into the ballroom lay 2 more blackened bodies. The doctor made his way into the cocktail lounge, expecting to see more dead, but the cocktail lounge was empty. The whole bay windows had looked into the Ogden galaxy. Now was a great long patch of jelly sealant. Most of the vermin had died in space, and the pirates had shot the rest. Upstairs, the walls were likewise patched with red jelly sealant. The doctor made his way along the crew's small corridors through the door to the bridge. There were no walls or scrambled eggs blocking his way. He stepped through quickly. The horseshoe computers had been smashed apart, and in the gap lay the dead body of Captain Georgina, wet 11 of the second mid-dynasty. And there were a few other composers around, but there was nothing to be done with them. Instead, the doctor moved quickly past them to examine the sparkling remains of the computers. But they could tell him nothing. He had no idea how long he had been since the loop had come apart, nor where the pirate ship had gone now. He'd lost Martha and to them again. But as he'd promised himself before, he'd do whatever it took to find her. He rummaged through his pockets of the suit jacket for a bit of paper and pen, almost cut himself on the dagger he'd confiscated from the unconscious Dashiell a time ago, when they'd still been enemies and people could die. Doctor, he spun around on his heels of his trainers, the egg-shaped orange. The tentacled Miss Wingsworth stood in the doorway of the bridge. She no longer had any of her extravagant jellyware, and her flimsy dress had been splattered with muck and blood. "Hi," said the doctor. "Whatever are you doing, dear?" she asked. Write a note in case there were any survivors, he said. He left the note on the wreck of the horseshoe of computers and hurried over to her. Are you all right? He asked. Oh, we soldiers on, dear, she said. But you know there's nothing to drink downstairs. Shocking, he said. I'd complain. I did, said Miss Wingsworth, laughing. Only there's no one here to take the slightest bit of notice. The laugh died in her throat, and the doctor could only see her refusing to let him see how scared she had been, how much she'd suffered. It's going to be all right, he said, I promise you. Miss Wingsworth reached out a tentacle to him. Martha, she said, a tremor in her voice, she said I had to find you. And you have, said the doctor kindly. It's going to be all right. I'm here now. I just have to tell me what I missed. Miss Wingsworth's tears streamed down her egg-shaped orange body. Did her best to explain. The pirates, she said. They came, they killed everybody, and no one's coming back.